Hello, I am Gregory McGlothlin, and I am reading from Dickens, the Pickwick Papers, Chapter 7, when Mr. Pickwick and some people go rook hunting. Pleasant, pleasant country, sighed the enthusiastic gentleman as he opened his lattice window. Who could live to gaze from day to day on bricks and slates, who had once felt the influence of a scene like this? Who could continue to exist where there are no cows, but the cows on the chimney pots? Nothing redolent of pan but pan tiles, no crop but stone crop. Who could bear to drag out a life in such a spot? Who, I ask, could endure it? And having cross-examined solitude after the most approved precedents at considerable length, Mr. Pickwick thrust his head out of the lattice and looked around him. The rich, sweet smell of the hayricks rose to his chamber window. The 100 perfumes of the little flower garden beneath scented the air around. The deep green meadows shone in the morning dew that glistened on every leaf as it trembled in the gentle air, and the birds sang as if every sparkling drop were to them a fountain of inspiration. Mr. Pickwick fell into an enchanting and delicious reverie. "Hullo!" was the sound that roused him. He looked to the right, but he saw no one. His eyes wandered to the left and pierced the prospect. He stared into the sky, but he wasn't there, and then he did what a common mind would have done at once. He looked into the garden and there saw Mr. Wardle. "How are you?" said the good-humored individual, out of breath with his own anticipations of pleasure. "Beautiful morning, ain't it? Glad to see you up so early. Make haste down and come out. I'll wait for you here." Mr. Pickwick needed no second invitation. 10 minutes sufficed for the completion of his toilet, and the expiration of that time he was at the old gentleman's side. "Hullo!" said Mr. Pickwick in his turn, seeing his companion was armed with a gun, and another lay ready on the grass. "What's going forward?" "Why, your friend and I," replied the host, "are going rook shooting before breakfast. He's a very good shot, ain't he?" "I've heard him say he's a capital one," replied Mr. Pickwick, "but I never saw him aim at anything." "Well," said the host, "I wish he'd come. Joe." "Joe!" The fat boy, who under the exciting influence of the morning did not appear to be more than 3 parts of a fraction asleep, emerged from the house. "Go up and call the gentleman and tell him he'll find me and Mr. Pickwick in the rookery. Show the gentleman the way there, d'ye hear?" The boy departed to execute his commission, and the host, carrying both guns like a second Robinson Crusoe, led the way from the garden. "This is the place," said the old gentleman, pausing after a few minutes' walking in an avenue of trees. The information was unnecessary, for the incessant cawing of the unconscious rooks was sufficiently indicated their whereabouts. The old gentleman laid one gun on the ground and loaded the other. "Here they are," said Mr. Pickwick, and as he spoke, the forms of Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle appeared in the distance. The fat boy, not being quite certain which gentleman he was directed to call, had with peculiar sagacity and prevent the possibility of any mistake, called them all. "Come along," shouted the old gentleman, addressing Mr. Winkle. "A keen hand like you ought to have been up long ago, even to such poor work as this." Mr. Winkle responded with a forced smile, and took up the spare gun with an expression of countenance with a metaphysical rook, impressing with a foreboding of his approaching death by violence, may be supposed to assume. It might have been keenness, but it looked remarkably like misery. The old gentleman nodded, and 2 ragged boys who had been marshmallowed to the spot under the direction of the infant Lambert forthwith commenced climbing up 2 of the trees. "What are these lads for?" inquired Mr. Pickwick abruptly. He was rather alarmed, for he was not quite certain but that the distress of the agricultural interest, about which he had often heard a great deal, might have compelled the small boys attached to the soil to earn a precarious and hazardous subsistence by making marks of themselves for inexperienced sportsmen, only to start the game, replied Mr. Wardle, laughing.